All right, so you saw that opening speech on going into Haiti, and then read that article on the effect of Operation Uphold Democracy since then, and whether it was successful or not. I'll let you make your own decisions on whether you think that was a successful democratization play. The assessment that Carruthers makes in general is this. This is going to be the conclusion. Well, this is the conclusion he's going to draw, I'm going to say, from what he saw in the Clinton administration. So he looks around and he says, okay, the Clinton administration did democratization in all these different areas. When was it successful and when wasn't it? And what he found is that when they assisted, really successful. When the U.S. initiated them, not successful. So the U.S. was less successful when initiating transitions. And two examples he's going to give is going to be Somalia and Haiti. And in both those situations, when the U.S. tried to initiate, start the democratization process, it didn't really work that well. And what this does, and this is not just Carruthers doing this, but what this actually ends up doing in the 1990s is it really begins an academic search where PhDs and all sorts of people start doing a lot of research and a lot of writing on the question of not whether democratization is good or not. Democratization is sort of seen as a good thing. Even if you're a realist, you can be happy that people are now in a democracy. You just might not think it's as important as a liberal internationalist might think it is, but you can still be happy about it. So the conversation is not whether democracy is a good thing or whether democratization is a good thing. The question becomes, what needs to be in place before democratization can happen successfully? What's the best process by which a transition can happen? Should powerful states like the United States or even the UN, should they initiate those or not? And obviously Carruthers' position is don't initiate. The neoconservatives out there, neocons, I'll let you try to remember what you think they would say. They would say, yeah, initiating is a good thing. It's better to be free no matter how you get that way. This is similar to Colin Powell's Pottery Barn Rule. Colin Powell, he talked about this with the Iraq War back under George H.W. Bush when he was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And his Pottery Barn Rule was, if you break it, you buy it. So don't break it. That if you start the transition, then if it's a good transition or a bad transition, you own it. And so don't initiate a democratic transition. That's the idea here. Later on, what we're going to see George W. Bush. He's going to have some neoconservatism. We're going to talk about that on Friday. But neoconservatism, and the flaw that Carruthers is going to talk about with that is that that neocons failed to see the distinction between assisting a transition and initiating transition. Again, it's not a question about whether democratization is good or not. You saw those articles we read earlier about that democratization is not always a positive thing. But that's not what we're going to get at this time frame. At this time frame, we're going to get democratization is a good idea. It's just during the Clinton years, there's this sort of, the lesson is don't initiate them, leading to the George W. Bush years where the lesson is initiate them. One more idea that he throws out that's a really important assessment of Clinton's foreign policy is just straight up, let's look inside the United States and see what's happening. What impact did the domestic politics have? And what he's going to argue is the partisan politics of the United States undermine democracy promotion. So without going too far in depth on U.S. history, in 1994, I want to say, 1994, this was the congressional election. Am I saying this right? Let me do my math right now. Yeah, I want to say it was 1994. 1994, the House of Representatives has a huge shift. And all of a sudden, Republicans now are in charge. And they're led by this guy named Newt Gingrich. That's him right there, who becomes the Speaker of the House. And he essentially leads, well, is that true? I don't know if I'm saying all this right. Anyways, the point is the Republicans become a big deal at this point. Newt Gingrich is definitely leading. He must be Speaker of the House. He's sitting right there. He's definitely leading the charge in this whole thing, and it's a much more conservative, and I don't mean neoconservative, I mean a much more conservative House of Representatives. And obviously, to do the things you want to do in foreign policy, you need the House of Representatives to pay the bills. And of course, some of the things that the more conservative Republicans want is they want more spending on military. They want a few more of those things like that. And that's not exactly what Clinton's up for. So the argument goes that they weren't that thrilled with democracy promotion. They were more, so you had, for example, you have many more defensive realists now in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And those defensive realists are going to argue for one of two things. They're going to argue for either why bother with democracy promotion? It should all be about power. And then you have the isolationists who are going to say, let's not spend money on other people's business. So in 1994, the Republicans controlled Congress. They cut foreign aid to a lot of these democracy promotion programs. They did not have a real agreement on why Clinton foreign policy was bad. Like I said, defensive realists thought one thing, isolationists thought another thing, the offensive realists thought another thing, the neocons who were in this group also thought another thing. They all disagreed with each other, but what they could all agree on was that Clinton foreign policy not good. So they could all agree it was not good, and they cut aid to that foreign policy. They wanted to spend it other places, or they just didn't want to spend as much money on these things. So that really hampered Clinton's ability. And again, he's elected in 1992. So that really hampers his ability over the next 6 years to get the democracy promotion done he wants to get done. So there just isn't that money available. 1996 is the presidential election. And in this election, the Republicans continue to be split. It's one of the reasons why it was hard to find a candidate, a Republican candidate who could stand up against Bill Clinton. We kind of see that right now with the Democrats. There's a general feeling among Democrats they don't like Trump, but there's real differences in terms of who they think is going to be the best candidate to stand against Trump, because they have very different views on that. That's the same thing that's happening for the Republicans in 1996. They did not like Clinton for a bunch of reasons, foreign policy just being one of them. But they couldn't agree on what they wanted instead. So they ended up with a candidate they were not that thrilled with. But here's the continuing split in foreign policy in the Republican Party. So we're not going to talk about domestic stuff. We're just going to talk about foreign policy. So the neocons are starting to come back again. Remember, after the end of the Cold War, they kind of said, yeah, we win. And they kind of chilled out a little bit. Over the next few years, they watched Clinton doing things that they did not think were good things. I know that he was talking about democratization. They liked that. But he was doing it so slow, and he wanted to bring the UN. And it was just like, come on. The U.S. needs to do this. They need to lead the way. There are people around the world that are suffering. They looked at, one of the big things was Iraq at this point. We know that in George H.W. Bush's time, he led a coalition to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And since then, there'd been a no-fly zone that the U.S. had been operating and economic sanctions over Iraq. And so now, 5 years later, 6 years later, whatever we're at, there's still this no-fly zone that the United States is doing over Iraq. There's still economic sanctions. There's still a lack of democracy in Iraq. And the neocons are starting to say, this is weird. We did all this work and we still have a dictatorship in Iraq. That can't be the case. So the U.S., and we're going to talk more about neocons on Friday, but the U.S. should undertake unilateral democracy promotion. You wait for the UN, you're going to be waiting a long time. We have the power, we have the tools, we have the moral high ground here. We need to slay the world's monsters. This is a very different analogy or different sort of rhetoric than putting out brush fires, right? That's the sort of rhetoric we had at the earlier parts of this. This is, you're not putting out brush fires, you are slaying the world's monsters. All right, so that's neocons. The realists, they wanted what's called selective engagement, which you guys read about in the Barry Posen article last week. Now, if you remember right, what selective engagement was all about is You're not engaging everywhere around the world because all you care about is just sort of balance of power, that sort of stuff. But you're not going to engage everywhere. You're only going to engage in the places that matter, like the Middle East matters. Does Africa matter? Not really. Does China matter? Yes, China matters. So only the places that matter for your power, selective engagement. The argument that the realists would make was that Clinton lacks this selective criteria. He just wants to get involved in everybody's business for no real good reason. And you can make the argument, though I don't know that it was this heavily made, but part of the argument was, say, the 1994 use of force in Haiti. The realists were basically arguing, was that the best place to use? I mean, if we're going to use force, is that really where you want to use it? Haiti? How does that help our balance of power? How does that help our power around the world? If anything, it just makes us look kind of dumb because we're engaging for democracy rather than for our own power. So Clinton lacks this selective criteria. The key thing that you should be considering, the key criterion should be national security, or for realists, it would be power. And what's the biggest threat to national security? Let's take a second here. I want you to think for a second. I'm going to pause. All right, think. What is the biggest threat to national security if you're a defensive realist? Okay, Russia is a good choice. Russia, to be honest with you, in the 1990s, we got them. They're taken care of. Don't worry about that. What's the biggest new threat to national security? Now you're probably thinking China. It's not China. China's not the China we have today. Yes, in 10 years, China will probably be that thing, but that is not the thing we should be worried about today. The thing we should be worried about today are rogue states with weapons of mass destruction. North Korea, Iran. And they don't have weapons of mass destruction, but they're all thinking about getting them. And the other one is Iraq. These three things are actually going to be called by George W. Bush the axis of evil. That's going to be a big part of this whole thing. But rogue states getting weapons of mass destruction is the biggest threat to national security. That's where we need to be focused. What has Clinton done to stop North Korea from getting nuclear weapons? Not much. And that's going to be part of the conversation. So last slide. Dole is the guy, Robert Dole. He's the guy that actually ends up becoming the Republican candidate in 1996. His advisors are mostly neocons. Now they're going to lose this election, but these guys are going to head off in 2000 and work for other candidates, actually not for W so much, George W. Bush, but work for other candidates. And when George W. Bush becomes president, a lot of these people are going to come with him because he's going to be bringing some of these other people with him. So, because again, W was not a big foreign policy guy either, so he needed help on this, and here they were ready to help. And what their main argument's going to be is Clinton cut defense too far. It's harmed our military, harmed our power, harmed our ability to do things around the world that are good things. And by good, I mean democratization. Dole's problem, and this was the reason why all this didn't matter, because as much as Dole could say, and his neocon advisors could say, we need to undertake unilateral democracy promotion, we have to slay the world's monsters, we have to be ready for those things. The problem was that in 1996, Americans looked around the world and they said, things are still going pretty good. Economy's going good. Why should we spend money on other things around the world, like that whole Cold War crap, when we're safe at home? It's going to take something like 9/11 to really get the public to start to feel threatened. And that's when things are going to change again. But at this point, that's the assessment. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to hear at the end, you're going to watch a 35-minute, it's a speech. Don't get me wrong. You're going to want to settle in, take some notes. But it's going to be Thomas Carruthers. So we just had an assessment of what happened with democratization in the Clinton years. And now we're going to see his view on what happened with democratization in the Obama years. And I have two questions for you. Do you agree with Carruthers' perspective and his argument? And again, I'm talking about both of these together. And B, what are the lessons about U.S. foreign policy and democratization that you're taking away now? Is democratization a good idea? Is it not a good idea? Is it a good idea but just has to be done a particular way? Those are the questions I want you to ask, and you're going to have a discussion on that, or an assignment. I'm not sure which yet. All right, I'll see you guys on Friday. Bye.